On May 2nd, 1945, newspapers around the world exploded with headlines like lightning over exhausted cities. Berlin was surrendering to the Red Army. That news, repeated endlessly through radios and loudspeakers, was the final blow against a colossus that was already staggering. In just a few days, Germany laid down its arms in the West on May 7th and in the East on May 9th. The 8th was marked as Victory in Europe Day. Thus ended Adolf Hitler's Third Reich, a dragon of steel that finally expired after leaving behind ruins, corpses, and a bitter lesson about the limits of human ambition. But what if that surrender had never happened? Let us imagine April 1945 with a darker twist. After months under siege, Berlin resurfaces like a wounded beast that refuses to die. The infantry of the Reich pushes the Red Army out of entire districts. The Soviets, taken by surprise, retreat in shame. The defenders are elderly men, women, and teenagers conscripted at the last minute, but they fight with the stubbornness of those who are protecting their very last trench. In the bunker where, in real history, Hitler ended his life, here he remains steadfast, convinced that he can still reverse the course of the war. A stroke of luck, a Soviet strategic mistake, or an Allied collapse would be enough to change history. In this alternative universe, the Nazi beast manages to negotiate a ceasefire that freezes the war in a bloody stalemate. That armistice, far from true peace, would be the prelude to a divided world. Meanwhile, the great Allied promise in Northern Europe dissolves like smoke. Operation Overlord, conceived as the key to liberation, turns into a quagmire that swallows men, ammunition, and hopes. The beaches of Normandy, which in our reality were the beginning of the end for Nazism, here are transformed into cemeteries with improvised crosses. The roads become severed arteries cut by the Wehrmacht, which manages to isolate and encircle hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The Allied commanders, unable to hold the lines, order a shameful withdrawal. Images of British and American soldiers fleeing on ships back to England cause shock in their home countries. Military failure turns into political crisis. The population, tired of funerals, demands that their governments find some kind of agreement to stop the bloodshed. Without outside help, France is left at the mercy of the German colossus. Panzer divisions move like a storm of steel. Cities and ports change hands in a matter of days. The old collaborationism of the Vichy regime is reactivated and offers Berlin a bureaucracy already trained to obey. Records, citizen lists, and police forces are handed over to the Reich, enabling a much more efficient and brutal occupation. The Eiffel Tower flies a red flag with a swastika, while Parisian cafes fill with Nazi officers. Humiliated and divided, France becomes a political satellite of Germany, a territory where the resistance barely survives, in small groups hunted down without respite. Bad news falls like lead on the Allied capitals. In London, rationing lines grow longer, and Parliament is split between continuing the war or making a deal with Hitler. In Washington, Congress faces mounting opposition from a society that no longer wants to send its sons to die in Europe. In Moscow, Stalin watches with rage as the Eastern Front freezes and his dream of spreading communism westward fades away. In the end, social exhaustion and political pressure force leaders to sit down and negotiate. The United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, France and China cede diplomatic ground to stop the hemorrhage. The result is a historic armistice. Hitler keeps his conquests, redraws borders, and consolidates his power in Europe. For millions of people, the war does not end in victory or defeat, but in an uncomfortable pause. The geopolitical impact is seismic. Germany, already strengthened since 1938, emerges as an industrial giant. Its factories work day and night, fueled by French coal, Romanian oil, and Scandinavian steel. Its army, hardened by years of combat, becomes the most advanced military machine on the planet. The Reich administers territories, raw materials, and strategic ports, while dictating prices, routes, and treaties.
Niemand muss in Deutschland kommen und muss sagen, den Frieden wollen wir, aber diese ununterbrochene Entrückung lehnen wir ab und die Entbehrung ertragen wir nicht. Bei Diktaten wirken wir nicht mit. Sie mögen.
The new order allows no neutrality. Countries that refuse to submit are isolated economically and militarily. Europe, from the Atlantic to the Urals, is forced to revolve around Berlin, which proclaims itself the center of Western civilization. In our history, Operation Paperclip took German scientists to the United States, where their knowledge fueled the space race. But in this universe, that treasure remains in Berlin. German engineers developed nuclear reactors, intercontinental rockets, and cutting-edge chemical weapons. The atomic bomb bearing an imperial eagle is no longer a metaphor. Germany becomes a nuclear power even before the United States. In addition, the Reich develops a space program of its own, placing satellites in orbit and designing rockets capable of delivering payloads to any point on the planet. Technological supremacy ensures that no power can challenge its dominance without risking annihilation. The dark side of that splendor is a bottomless pit. Without Allied liberation, the extermination camps continue operating with bureaucratic efficiency. Every train that arrives at Auschwitz, Treblinka, or Sobibor unloads thousands of condemned lives. Eugenics becomes official policy of the Reich and spreads to its satellite countries. Jews, Roma, homosexuals, and people with disabilities are systematically eliminated. Other minorities, such as Slavs, are reduced to slavery. The idea of a German living space is translated into millions of hectares of expropriated land, where local peasants are displaced or exterminated. The Holocaust, far from ending, expands without any international opposition. Anti-Semitism, which had spread for centuries across Europe, finds the perfect political framework to become fully institutionalized. France, Italy, and much of Eastern Europe adopt exclusion policies similar to those of Germany. Without the Nuremberg trials, there is no pedagogy of horror. The world lacks even the words needed to name these crimes. Human rights treaties are never written because the very concept of universal rights is buried under Nazi racial ideology. Entire generations grow up on a continent where discrimination and genocide are simply part of the legal landscape. Nazi victory does not only reshape politics, it also molds culture. German becomes the language of prestige in universities, diplomacy, and trade. Cinema is used as propaganda, music is limited to what is approved by the regime, and dissident literature is destroyed. the artistic avant-garde, branded as degenerate, are wiped out of museums and libraries. Writers, musicians, and filmmakers who manage to escape flee to the Americas, carrying with them a cultural heritage that Europe loses forever. The continent becomes a monotonous, uniform, obedient block where creativity dies under the weight of censorship. France and the United Kingdom, because of their geographic proximity and strategic value, become key pieces on the Nazi chessboard. In Paris, a puppet government administers day-to-day affairs, while in London, the monarchy is reduced to a decorative symbol under Berlin's tutelage. Their colonies and naval resources feed the German war machine. British and French citizens, accustomed to democratic societies, must learn to live under the constant surveillance of Nazi commissioners. Resistance exists, but it is small and punished with extreme harshness. The illusion of sovereignty is maintained through rigged elections and controlled parliaments, but everyone knows that real authority resides in Berlin. The Soviet Union, however, cannot be subdued so easily. Its vast geography, its extreme climate, and its enormous population make total occupation impossible. Moscow becomes the opposite pole to Berlin, leading a communist bloc that controls much of Asia and Eastern Europe.
Товарищи, тяжелый письмовец приходится праздновать сегодня 24-ю годовщину Октябрьской революции. Вероломные нападения немецких разбойников и навязанная нам война создали угрозу для нашей страны.
The continent is divided into two spheres of influence, one dominated by Nazism and the other by communism. The tension between the two gives rise to an alternative Cold War, where the nuclear threat hangs over the planet and every regional conflict runs the risk of turning into a total war. Between Nazi Europe and the United States lies the Atlantic, a liquid wall that protects the American continent. Its vast territory, its natural resources, and its industrial power make it a very difficult adversary to defeat. Even so, Washington cannot ignore the existence of a victorious Reich. Relations between the two turn into a delicate balance between cooperation and confrontation. The United States seeks to contain Nazi expansion without entering into a direct war, while strengthening its presence in Latin America and Asia. Peace depends on constant negotiations, where every diplomatic mistake can become a global catastrophe. The last Axis power is Japan. Even with a German victory, the Pacific keeps its own logic. The USSR advances into Manchuria, while the United States launches offensives that come ever closer to the Japanese archipelago. The attack on Pearl Harbor sealed a popular will that will not accept armistices. Tokyo must be defeated. In this universe, Japan is occupied by the United States after the atomic bomb is dropped. But that occupation acquires an even greater strategic value. It serves to contain the Soviet Union and to keep a close watch on Nazi Europe's movements. Japan becomes the American lighthouse in Asia, a platform from which to balance global power. This story does not claim to offer certainties, but rather to ignite questions. What freedoms would have survived in a Nazi world? Which industries would have flourished and which would have been smothered? Which rights would never have existed if the Reich had consolidated its power? Beyond the game of hypotheses, this scenario helps us reflect on how wars shape societies, cultures, and industries. Changing a single outcome forever alters the course of humanity. Imagination has already explored this nightmare. The Man in the High Castle, by Philip K. Dick, portrays a North America divided between victorious powers. Fatherland, by Robert Harris, describes a Europe where Nazism survives thanks to repression and silence. Swastika Night by Catherine Burdekin, written even before the war broke out, anticipates centuries of cult to the Führer and societies shaped by oppression. All these works agree on one point. Fascism, though powerful, ends up devouring itself through its own contradictions. It controls bodies and territories, but it never fully manages to dominate ideas or extinguish human rebelliousness. We imagine this alternative timeline in order to better value our own. A Nazi victory would not have been a merely European episode, but a global tide that would have contaminated economies, schools, temples, laboratories, and homes. The Second World War was the earthquake that redrew borders and values. Its real outcome, with the defeat of totalitarianism, allowed the emergence of international institutions, peace treaties, and charters of human rights. Changing that outcome, even if only in our imagination, reminds us that humanity's path is fragile. History is not carved in stone. Every decision, every battle, and every pact marks the destiny of entire generations.